Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Neila Tazieh. I'm member of the Parliament of Morocco and member of the board of the Parliamentary Network. We are sorry for the little delay of this session due to some changes in the program. So, honorable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me and a pleasure to moderate this panel. And the theme of this session is Migration, Refugees, and Societies, inspired by the report of the same name that has been issued by the World Bank in 2023. Migration is an essential development challenge. The migration landscape is evolving and will become part of the solution to global challenges. About 184 people, including 37 million refugees, live outside their country of nationality. That is 2.3% of the world's population. 80% of these migrants are economic migrants. As the world struggles to cope with global economic imbalances, diverging demographic trends, and climate change, we must find solutions to better manage migration, to fight disinformation and xenophobia. Future legislation focused on managing migration can allow it to become a force for prosperity that helps achieve the sustainable development goals. So we will try to hold this session in less than an hour. So I will try to be quick on the presentation of our speakers. And I will start by presenting them very rapidly. Mr. Indermit Gill, who is Chief Economist and Senior Vice President for Development and Economics at the World Bank. And Honorable Oana Silviatu, Member of the Parliament of Romania and Chairwoman of the Committee of Youth and Sports. She has been member of the government of Romania, she was minister in a former government of Romania. And we have Honorable Majara Coulibaly from Ivory Coast. Majara Coulibaly is member of the Committee of Defense and Security, but she's also member of another committee of her parliament, which is the Committee of Public Policy Evaluation, which is a very important objective of parliaments in the world. So to start, we will, and to go further with the lessons and also the conclusions of this 2023 World Report on Migration and Refugees, I will give the floor to Mr. Gil Indermit from the World Bank, who has a presentation on screen. So the floor is yours. Now you can come here. No.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator. So I'm going to show you a few slides very, very quickly. But if you have any questions, you can always ask me and we can put the slides back if necessary. So this is a report that we finished a few months back, and it's about the 200 million or so people who live in a country other than the country of citizenship, right? So this is what it looks like, by the way. So you have essentially about 80% of this are folks whom people whom we would call economic migrants, right? And about 20% are refugees. And if you can look at this, the main thing that strikes you is that even though you always hear about the whole problem of migration and refugees from rich countries, from developed countries, you actually see over here is that more than half of the refugees and migrants actually live in middle-income or low-income countries or newly high-income countries like the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. Okay? Right? So you see that the problem is more one of the developing world and less of the high-income countries. So we actually wrote this report against the backdrop of very rapid changes in the demography of nations, right? So essentially, what we are seeing is, or what we will expect very soon, is that these unprecedented changes in demography are sparking a global competition for workers, which we had already seen playing out for things like medical staff during the pandemic, right? And it's because high-income countries are aging very fast. So you see up there, if you look at Italy's thing, you see that the population of Italy will become more old, but it'll also be cut in about half unless it does something, right? 1 out of 6 Koreans will be over 80 years of age by 2050, right? The thing though is that middle-income countries, like here represented by Mexico, they are also aging very fast. So essentially Bangladesh, China, India, Mexico, and Turkey all now have fertility rates below replacement level. Okay? So only low-income countries actually have booming populations. This means 2 things. The first one is high-income countries are going to require workers, and more of these migrants are actually going to come from low-income countries, not from middle-income countries. So high-income countries have gotten used to getting migrants from countries that have decent education systems and so on. They will have to start to get used to migrants who don't have decent education levels and so on. So the main point though is this. We know that when migration is managed well, it provides benefits both for sending countries as well as for the host countries, right? When migration is not managed well, it can harm both sides. Okay? And the thing that is happening is that what you should expect is that it's going to become harder to manage migration, not easier, okay? For the reasons that I just laid out. Okay? Now, so we tried to sort of find a way to sort of help in managing this migration better, right? So the way that we did was we actually took 2 strands of the literature, 2 strands of the policy work on migration. The first part of it is from the economic literature. It's from labor economics, right? Which you see on the left side. And very, very simply put, it's a cost-benefit analysis, right? So the more the skill of the migrant matches the needs of the destination labor market, right? The larger are the gains, okay? And you get gains for the destination countries, for the migrants themselves, as well as for the origin countries, right? So this is what we refer to as the match of a migrant's skills with the needs at the destination. So for example, over here you see the stronger the match, the larger the gains of the gains of the move, right? Now, the other approach actually comes from international law, right? And it looks at the people's motive, right? So when people move out because of persecution or conflict, they are called refugees. And the country of destination and the country of transit is actually obligated to host them, regardless of the cost. And this is because we have an international agreement that if somebody moves because they're being persecuted in their own country, countries have agreed to give them safe refuge, right? Now, what we try to do is that we take these two strands of the literature and we combine them, right? And if you combine them, you get a matrix like this, right? So basically, you end up having 4 types of situations. So a sizable number of economic migrants that bring skills that are a strong match for the destination economy, and they do not have substantial need for international protection. Okay? So this is the upper left quadrant. And you find that a large number of people actually come into that group. Okay? And because the movement actually generates net gains for themselves as well as the countries of origin and destination, the policy goal is essentially to further increase the costs and reduce the benefits. Now, the situation actually is similar for the few refugees who actually have skills in demand. I say few because that's just by coincidence, because refugees are leaving not because they actually have the skills that somebody else needs, but they're leaving because they face persecution at home, right? Or they face a threat to their life at home. Okay. So now, then if you look at the lower part, you will see two groups, right? The first group are distressed migrants who are not leaving because they face persecution at home. They're leaving because of economic reasons, right? Okay. Now, they may not bring the skills that the destination countries require, right? So for them, actually, destination countries are not required to actually host them, okay? Because they're economic migrants, they're not refugees, right? Now, then there's a final group, which is the group of refugees, right? Who have the same characteristics as the distressed migrants, with the one difference that it is not that the host country has to accept them, okay? And so you have three groups that really matter a lot. The first one are those who are actually good matches for the destination country labor markets. The second one are similar people who are not facing a persecution at home, but who are not a good match. And then the third group, which is refugees, who have some attributes of the second group in the sense that their skills don't match those of the destination country labor markets, but there's a main difference is that the destination country has to accept them, okay? So I'm going to skip this slide because we're running out of time and get straight to this one over here. So the real question that actually comes then is, you know, those three quadrants really matter a lot, right? So you essentially have that first quadrant over there. I don't think I can use it. That you have the northwest quadrant, right? You see that because you have the economic motive and a strong match with the host country's labor market, this is essentially largely a unilateral responsibility, okay? If somebody comes to the United States with skills that the United States wants, this is essentially a matter largely of the United States. Now, there are good practices there. The good practices involve balanced labor laws, and they involve temporary worker programs because sometimes the skills of the worker only matches the demands of the destination labor markets for a short time, right? For farm harvests and things like that. And many of them actually want to go back to their host countries, or they want to go back to the sending country. So for example, you could be thinking about a Mexican worker and so on who comes just for a short while to the United States and then goes back. So that's what we sort of say there. This is not a big problem. This is not a big problem. The second problem is that if there's an economic motive, but there's a weak match, and this can be a serious problem, right? Now, in this case, it's usually a bilateral responsibility, okay? In the sense that both the United States, as well as the country that is sending these people, they have to come up with a good program for either bilateral training agreements or for those who they feel are not going to be good matches in the destination country labor force, humane repatriation programs. Okay? The big problem, of course, is the third one, where you have a refugee motive and a weak match. And what we say over there is this should be a multilateral responsibility. It's a multilateral responsibility because the destination country is doing the world a favor. It is doing the world's duty to accept refugees because we have all signed on to that law, right? But on the other hand, we know that these workers have other features. The first one is they often don't have the skills that would help them assimilate immediately into that. On the other hand, we also know another thing about them, is that while we say that these workers are only temporarily in these countries, they end up being there for an average of around 14 or 15 years. 14 or 15 years is not a short time, and you cannot spend 14 or 50 years just in a refugee camp. So that's really the big issue over there. And that's where we have to sort of make sure that you treat this as a development problem and not just as a relief problem. That's the first one. And then the second thing is, to the extent that the host country or the transit country is actually bearing the burden, the social burden and the financial burden and so on, of hosting these people, it is doing this on behalf of the world. So the costs also must be borne multilaterally and not just by the host or the transit country. So there's a very simple dichotomy over here. For some movements, it's unilateral. For some others, it's bilateral. And for others yet, it is multilateral. Okay? So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Gill, for this presentation. And now we will open the floor to our honorable members of parliament. And regarding to your respective careers and being parliamentarians, I would like to ask you to insist on the legislative approaches, if possible, to this specific subject that is very interesting. We know it's the last session and everybody's really tired, but it's such an important matter. We're all looking on how to have a better balance and fair way to treat people, migrants, and refugees. So the next speaker is Honorable Oana Silvia Toiud, which I presented very rapidly earlier. So as I said, she's the chairwoman of the Committee of Youth and Sport at the Parliament of Romania. She's a teacher, former Secretary of State at the Ministry of Labor. And Oana, you were very active in the entrepreneurial fields. I think you're an entrepreneur too. And for years you have contributed to the training of thousands of young people across Romania in connecting the best ideas with a global network of solutions. So I would like to emphasize on what I'm going to say now, is that Oana has been recognized as one of the 6 young leaders who are improving the state of the world by the World Economic Forum. So you can applaud her, please. Some applause. And so the floor is yours for 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you. I have to say, though, that title was a title when I was a bit younger, just to clarify that. The young leader was when I was younger. Before I go into the technical parts, I'm not very good at making new friends, and I think the next speech is going to go in that direction as well. But there is something that has been said throughout the day that I feel the need to respectfully respond to. And I have heard throughout the day that we in the parliaments are responsible to translate to our people these solutions, that our support is needed. And I've also heard at some point a grateful statement that we are responsible parliamentarian members and therefore do not follow the popular opinion, but rather the data and the scientists. And I respectfully disagree. I respectfully disagree not because I don't put a lot of serious responsibility to data and scientists, and I highly appreciated the presentation, but I fully disagree because we are the ones actually paid to listen to the people. That is literally our job. That is literally where we get our power and where we get our salaries from. And I'm not saying it just from the mere survival of the fact that we need their votes to continue in our jobs. I'm also saying it because I think it's absolutely essential, because what people feel, what people say is similar across countries. And they are not bad things. They want to feel safe in their livelihoods. They want to feel protected. They want to look optimistically into the future for them and their families. And when that is not listened, when there is no empathy to that, with no bad intentions, what arises is fear. Fear of what? Fear of the future, of international institutions, fear of too fast of a change, and that becomes an obstacle in the direction where we want to go. It is not the people that are the obstacle, but the fear that is generated sometimes by lack of dialogue, lack of empathy, or enough time to listen and work with them. And that's why I think it's absolutely essential that we as parliamentary members play that role, because it is the role of a politician. It is not the role of an expert. It cannot be. And now it's played heavily by artists, by activists, but those are people that are shouting at power rather than being in the circle of power as we are. And this being said, there are two stories that I want to share from Romania. And I have received this question a lot throughout the day. Oh, Romania, very interesting, on migration, how come? Because we're not the typical country that you would see in a panel about migration, but we are the country in the European Union that has the most citizens that are working outside our borders. We are the second country in the world after Syria in terms of how fast our diaspora was growing in the years in which the political decisions were not necessarily ones that citizens were endorsing. We currently have almost half of our working age population contributing to other economies than our own. And in the same time, we're not just a source country. As we have become a high-income country recently, we're also a destination country. And we're facing a huge labor shortage, and most entrepreneurs and industry pinpoint that as being the main challenge in economic development and the main challenge in green transition and digital transition. So for us, migration goes both ways in a sense. And that's why I think that handling migration better, handling the upskilling, reskilling, and empowering local entrepreneurs can also be the solution to the financing deficit that we have seen addressed in the morning panels. Why? Because the labor shortage is actually costing money that if we would produce, we would have to invest in the technologies that we need. For example, Germany estimates at 83 billion, UK estimates at about 41 billion. By the way, Germans and UK members in the room? No. Okay, then I can speak on those countries. So I think the money that we're saying in the morning panels that they're missing are actually there if we solve the labor shortage, if we handle migration better, upskilling and reskilling. And I think that also means empowering smaller actors through the strategies, deployment of funding, and legislations that we have. For example, Romania in the year 2004, 2005, when I was more or less a teenager finishing high school, was going through what is now the very fast digital transition. And we were having a disastrous internet. I don't know if that's the case in some of your countries. And the internet that was going well was extremely expensive, and just big companies were actually able to afford it. So what happened is that teenagers wanted to play online. It was no big strategy or PowerPoint. They simply wanted to play video games and talk to each other. So they started creating these small neighborhood networks by themselves, buying one very expensive subscription and just taking cables and putting it to other apartments. Why am I telling that story? Is because that has allowed us to leapfrog into what at some point was the best internet in the world, and now decades after still keeps us in the top 10 performing country. We still have the top 3, 5, or 10, depending on the index, fastest internet in the world, largest broadband, and especially one of the cheapest broadbands in the world, which means that even rural communities or lower income communities in the country have access through that to the world outside and skills. That's one story on the digital transition. We're actually making sure that the people were the ones that stood up to the challenge, made us leapfrog. Then it wasn't a state legislation, it was rather a lack of legislation that allowed this. Moving forward to 2022, we were having the same energy issues that the war has caused, the pandemic has caused. And this is a legislation done in Parliament. We have lowered the VAT on solar panels and made it that the legislation for people that wanted to have solar panels on their houses to connect to the grid, we made it simpler and faster. The effect of that was that in 7 months' time, we tripled the number of units that had solar energy, and we have doubled the solar energy capacity of the country in just 7 months, because the legislation was created in such a way to enable local action and to enable local entrepreneurship. And this circles back to the initial statement, this was possible in just 7 months to a year because we also had migrants that were working in doing this. And we also had Romanians that were migrants in other countries coming back and as entrepreneurs or investing in this type of solutions that they had already seen in their home host countries. And that is why I think that a lot of the legislation that can be done in the parliaments through the dialogue and the conversation with the people can actually create this catalyst factor that we need. Nomad visas, which is something that we also recently introduced and a lot of countries have done so. Easier recognition of each other's diplomas, for example. This is something that the governments, but also the parliaments could step into. So we lose less of the human capital when it's mobile across nations. And I think we also need to have a conversation if we're looking at the green transition, not just about the big projects and the infrastructure, which is absolutely needed, but also about the common deployment of skills in education and in adult education, because we're going to need, and as Gil was pointedly mentioning, we're going to compete on the same people, we're going to need the same type of skills in exactly the same time. So I think some countries might be faster in getting the money than they will be in getting the people to do the projects if we don't have this potentially global deployment of skills packages all across the life cycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Oana. So before giving the floor to Honorable Majara, I would like to go back to what you just said that really interested me is the effort that has to be done to reinforce the dialogue with the diaspora, because we're talking about how to change the way we're treating with migration. And the role of the diaspora is very important because they bring back know-how and skills. So there has to be some changes in the mindset. And this is, if you might excuse me, I will take 1 minute to talk about my country, because I'm Moroccan and Morocco is hosting these annual assemblies. And also because Morocco has a very ambitious strategy in terms of migration. We in Morocco we are a host in a transit country. So of course we are a hub between Europe and sub-Saharan countries. So in 2013, by the decision of our King Majesty Mohammed VI, we adopted an ambitious strategy on issues of migration and refugees. We hosted, since 2013, we regularized more than 50,000 people, migrants who came to Morocco, mainly from sub-Saharan countries. This strategy implemented ambitions such as access to social security for all the foreigners living in Morocco as all the Moroccan citizens. And that is something very important I have to emphasize on. And also the access to language courses for better inclusion, training programs for better skills, and the identification of the specific skills we need in our labor market. Also the promotion of cultural diversity, which is very important in terms of inclusion. So now that I've said this, I will just finish by saying that in 2018, Morocco hosted in Marrakesh the Intergovernmental Conference where was adopted the Global Compact for Migration. So now the floor is to Honorable Majara Coulibaly, who is a parliamentarian from Ivory Coast, but I have to say also that Honorable Majara was very much involved in social projects in her country, and she was working with NGOs, and she also launched her own NGO in terms of alphabetization and also helping the most vulnerable population. She's an incredible person, so I will give her the floor. Thank you.
Merci Leila. Je prends la parole cet après-midi en remplacement de l'honorable Dansa Kourouma, qui est le président du Parlement guinéen. Donc j'ai été substituée de façon assez assez brusque. Donc, je parlerai de la migration en deux points. Je suis un peu perturbée parce que, après la brillante intervention de M. Gill et de Mme Thiou, il va être difficile de parler de la migration, mais je vais m'y atteler. Je vais parler en 2 points de la migration d'abord en général et parler du cas spécifique de la Côte d'Ivoire. Voilà. Le changement climatique aggrave d'autres facteurs de migration. Environ 40% de la population mondiale, soit 3,5 milliards de personnes, vivent dans des endroits très exposés. En effet, du changement climatique, pénurie d'eau, sécheresse, stress thermique, élévation du niveau de la mer et phénomènes extrêmes tels que les inondations et les cyclones tropicaux. Les opportunités économiques diminuent dans les régions touchées, ce qui amplifie la vulnérabilité et alimente les pressions migratoires. En outre, les effets du changement climatique menacent l'habitabilité de régions entières dans les zones aussi diverses que le Sahel. Les terres basses du Bangladesh et le delta de Mekong, dans certains petits États insulaires en développement. Ces effets obligent les dirigeants à envisager des relocalisations planifiées. La plupart des mouvements attribués au changement climatique se sont jusqu'à présent produits sur de courtes distances, principalement à l'intérieur des mêmes pays, mais cela pourrait changer. Les questions de savoir si et dans quelle mesure le changement climatique amplifiera les flux migratoires internationaux dans les décennies à venir dépendent des politiques mondiales et nationales d'atténuation et d'adaptation adoptées et mises en œuvre aujourd'hui par les gouvernements. Après cette brève présentation, je vais m'atteler à parler un peu du cas de la Côte d'Ivoire spécifiquement. Il faut dire que je n'avais rien préparé. C'est tout à l'heure que j'ai pu griffonner quelques mots. Donc, soyez indulgents. L'immigration clandestine constitue une problématique dont il faut faire face afin de juguler les conséquences qui sont désastreuses. En Côte d'Ivoire, le gouvernement s'attelle à trouver une solution à ces fléaux par une politique d'insertion des jeunes dans le tissu social. Dans cette optique, en mars 2023, avec l'ambition de placer la jeunesse au centre des politiques publiques, la Côte d'Ivoire a décidé de faire de 2023 année de la jeunesse. Ce, à travers la mise en place d'un ambitieux programme baptisé Programme jeunesse du gouvernement qui s'étend sur la période 2023-2025 et qui vient réaffirmer le choix irréversible du pays à adresser la problématique de l'insertion socio-professionnelle des jeunes et de l'amélioration de leur employabilité. Pour le volet accélération de la formation, insertion professionnelle, cet ambitieux programme permettra d'offrir à près de 1 500 000 opportunités d'emploi, de formation, de financement de projets aux jeunes, pour un coût global de 1 118 millions de francs CFA. Le gouvernement a aussi décidé de multiplier sur le territoire national la construction de lycées professionnels afin de contribuer à la formation d'un capital humain de qualité pour la vitalité socio-économique du pays. Dans ce sens, le gouvernement a lancé la construction et l'équipement de 7 établissements de formation professionnelle. Concernant la promotion de l'entrepreneuriat, le gouvernement ivoirien a procédé dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre du projet Emploi Jeunes et Développement des compétences à la signature de 24 conventions pour un montant d'environ 31 milliards de francs CFA au profit de 68 000 jeunes en 2023. Cette inclusion sociale des jeunes voulue par le gouvernement concourt à l'amélioration des conditions d'épanouissement et du bien-être des populations jeunes, toute chose qui est gage de cohésion sociale et de stabilité. Cette politique en faveur de la valorisation et de l'épanouissement de la jeunesse est en totale cohérence avec le programme Une Côte d'Ivoire solidaire du président de la République de Côte d'Ivoire, son Excellence Alassane Ouattara, qui met au cœur de son action l'homme. C'est l'occasion pour moi d'inviter la Banque mondiale à continuer d'accompagner nos gouvernements dans ces vastes programmes de formation et d'employabilité de notre jeunesse afin qu'elle ne soit plus tentée par le mirage d'un bonheur hypothétique en Occident. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Honorable Majara Coulibaly. So now we'll open the discussion with the participants. So I will take the questions. And I will ask you also to introduce yourself and to just specify in case it is necessary to whom the question is addressed, whom of our speakers. So Mr. from Egypt. So I think we can start one question at a time because we have more than 20 minutes. Please proceed.
أحمد سمير عضو مجلس الشيوخ المصري. يعني سؤالي إلى مستر جيل و طبعا بشكرك على البرزنتيشن القيمة جدا اللي قدمتها، لكن هي فسرت أنواع اللاجئين بشكل عام على مستوى العالم، وذكرت في حديثك على شيء كان هام أن البلد المضيف للاجئين خاصة الذين يتأثرون بالأحداث السياسية والحروب هو يقدم خدمة للعالم. وبالتالي جعلتني أتحدث اليوم عن بلد بها 105 مليون مواطن، هي مصر دولتي. 4 مواليد في الدقيقة الواحدة، تزيد بمعدل 4 مواليد في الدقيقة الواحدة لنصل إلى ما يتعدى 6000 مواليد يوميا، ومع ذلك بها أعداد لاجئين تتعدى 11 مليون موجودين في مصر بلا معسكرات وبلا أي شيء، بالعكس يندمجون مع المواطنون المصريون بشكل كبير في استقبالهم. وهنا يأتي السؤال تحديدا كي لا أطيل في هذه الكلمة على دور البنك الدولي في دعم الدول، سواء دعم على المستوى الاقتصادي أو حتى على مستوى تقديم المعونة في إدارة مشكلة اللاجئين أو كيفية التعامل بشكل كبير جدا، خاصة أن الضغوط تزداد نتيجة الأحداث السياسية، ونتيجة أن المثال عندنا أن الدولة تتعرض لضغوط اقتصادية كبيرة جدا، وأيضا اللاجئين يزيدون من هذه المشكلة بشكل كبير. كل الشكر لك.
Okay, so we'll take another question from Guinea.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Fanta Conté, membre du Conseil national de la transition de la République de Guinée. Mon pays, la République de Guinée, la situation donc de mon pays, je veux parler de la situation économique, le chômage massif des jeunes, sont entre autres raisons aujourd'hui qui poussent beaucoup de jeunes Guinéens à la migration. Donc le défi qui se pose aujourd'hui aux dirigeants guinéens, c'est comment rassurer ces jeunes, leur donner de l'espoir pour rester dans le pays. Et comme vous le savez, chaque année, il y a des milliers de jeunes Guinéens qui sortent de nos universités et qui se retrouvent sur le marché de l'emploi, mais malheureusement, l'État ne pouvant pas embaucher tout le monde, beaucoup de ces jeunes se tournent vers l'entrepreneuriat. Mais là également, il y a une difficulté parce que beaucoup de ces jeunes n'arrivent pas à avoir accès aux appuis des institutions bancaires, donc appui au crédit. Et ça, c'est un véritable problème dans notre pays. Du coup, ces jeunes n'arrivent pas à développer leur business puisque les banques n'accordent pas de crédit aux jeunes. Donc, ma préoccupation aujourd'hui, c'est comment améliorer l'appui des institutions financières à l'entrepreneuriat jeune. Si vous pouvez partager avec nous votre expérience dans ce domaine, parce que dans mon pays, c'est une véritable problématique. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Une autre question, Madame du Sénégal. Donc.
Merci beaucoup. Je ne me suis pas présentée ce matin, c'est Honorable Juliette Zenga. Donc, je suis rapporteur de la commission urbanisme, logement et aussi équité territoriale. Moi, je crois aujourd'hui, je parle à tous les panélistes que je félicite pour leur présentation.
Vous pouvez parler plus fort dans le micro, s'il vous plaît?
Oui. Voilà. Donc, au niveau du Sénégal où je suis, il y a aujourd'hui une stratégie nationale que nous avons développée par rapport à l'immigration irrégulière, comme on dit. Et je crois que ce sont des politiques de jeunesse que tout pays doit développer. Pas seulement les pays du Sud, mais même les pays aussi du Nord. Et je crois en renforçant aussi les politiques de surveillance, d'équipement et de logistique pour freiner un peu le fléau. Moi, je dis que c'est un fléau aujourd'hui parce que beaucoup de jeunes meurent dans la Méditerranée et autres. Aujourd'hui, on prend au niveau du Sénégal, il y a la route du Nicaragua, donc qui est aussi une route très dangereuse. L'autre aspect, c'est sur tout de suite, j'ai oublié le nom de monsieur, qui a présenté sur le dividende démographique. Et je crois qu'aujourd'hui, c'est un objectif sur ce capital humain, de pouvoir au moins capturer ce dividende démographique et pouvoir assurer des politiques adaptées à ce que nous sommes en train de faire. L'Afrique a une population jeune et qui est très fougueuse. Donc cette population aujourd'hui a dans sa tête que nos ressources naturelles vont vers l'Europe, vont vers d'autres continents qui n'est pas l'Afrique. Et aujourd'hui, ces ressources naturelles nous reviennent transformées. Pourquoi aujourd'hui ne pas réformer ces politiques dans les pays en Afrique, mettre une politique d'industrialisation, accompagner les ressources naturelles, les politiques de développement durable pour pouvoir au moins freiner cela. Parce que je crois que c'est l'heure actuellement de pouvoir au moins revoir ces réformes et d'y aller ensemble avec tous les acteurs qui sont concernés. Je vous remercie.
Merci, honorable. Est-ce qu'il y a une question spécifique? Est-ce qu'il y a une question spécifique?
Voilà, la question spécifique, c'est par rapport au secteur informel et surtout avec les PME. Tout à l'heure, on l'a développé dans la digitalisation. Quel est le programme qui peut accompagner cela? Parce qu'on sait qu'aujourd'hui, il faut la transformation du secteur informel.
Tout à fait, la bonne gouvernance, la lutte contre l'informel,
la transparence, la réduction des comptes, voilà.
Pour encourager l'investissement et l'acte d'entreprendre. So we have now 3 questions. So Mr. Gill, would you like to answer?
Sure, ma'am. So I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, you have a microphone.
So I thought that the question about Egypt was excellent, and I don't have an excellent answer for you. The first thing is that from all that I've read about Egypt, it's been both a sending and a host, as well as a transit country, and it's done all of these things very, very well. The real issue over here is that we tend to sort of lend to countries on a country-by-country basis. I'm talking about the World Bank, and I'm talking about financial assistance now. And those countries, there are these 2 groups of countries. The first are the poorer countries that we call the International Development Agency countries. And then the other ones are the middle-income countries that we call the IBRD countries. So Egypt is an IBRD country. Now, in the case of the very poor country, what we've done is that we have created a new window where we actually have, rather than the funds coming from the country quotas, they're coming actually from the regional quotas. So as a result, for example, say that you have a low-income country that is hosting migrants. It does not have to use its own quota to actually pay for those. You can actually get it from a regional window. In the case of the IBRD countries, we don't have such a mechanism. So basically, we can help Egypt, but Egypt will be liable to pay that money later. So in some sense, Egypt is shouldering the responsibility that it has been given by the international community, but paying for it by itself. So you are absolutely right about it. But the thing that we try to do at the World Bank is we try to make sure that the problems faced by countries like Egypt, the countries like Jordan and so on, are made very, very loud and clear in fora, right? At the annual meetings, at other fora and so on, we make it very, very clear. Because otherwise what happens is that the debate is dominated by rich countries who say that, look, there are all these countries from middle income and poor countries who are coming, and we have to stop that somehow, right? So I think, now, what can Egypt do to think? So I think that what Egypt is doing is absolutely right in the sense, don't try to sort of put these people into refugee camps forever, because because these people will probably remain in the country for more than a decade, I think. But the second thing, I think that what we also have to sort of do is to just also to make sure that the private sector environment in a country is good, in the sense that you actually create jobs and so on, because you have to create jobs not just for the refugees, but for, exactly as you mentioned, the new babies who are born. Within 10, 15 years or so, they will start to look for jobs themselves, right? And I think that most countries on that second bit, I would say, are failing. They're not creating a private sector environment that actually creates the jobs and so on. In the case of Egypt, I think because of the heavy imprint of the government on the productive sector part, So you have a government that actually does a lot of economic activity. You call them state-owned enterprises and so on. That's the part that I would actually say, that's the part on which Egypt hasn't done well. On the other things that you mentioned, Egypt has done very well.
Thank you. Can anyone answer the question of honorable parliamentarian from Guinea about entrepreneurship?
Young people in the country, that is also a very important challenge for us as well. I can name some of the things that we have done, but we still face the challenge. We have just maybe partially decreased it. So one of the things that we have done that has been successful is that we have lowered the labor taxation on the IT&C field. And that was the first field where we've done that, and for, I think, a decade, it had stayed lower taxation just in that field. Why? That meant higher salaries, and it was more interesting for investors, but it also meant that when young people were choosing their career, they were more tempted to choose this rather than stay in roles that would be obsolete. So that's one thing that we did. We are now trying, and it's debated in the Constitutional Court, to lower the labor taxation for anyone under 26. But, and this is something important, I need to clarify this as a difference, not just between our countries, but between, I think, Africa and the European Union. We just have 15% of our population under 15. So when we say lower taxation for young people, that means less of a fiscal burden for us. It's very, very different because we, unfortunately, don't have that many young people as a normal pyramid would require. So that's one thing. But then something that I also feel the need to state is that we have an underrepresentation of young women in the labor force, and we're not singular in that case. Global data show disparities as well. And here we have, I think, what is one of the most, with 2 or 3 other countries, generous policies in terms of childcare. You can take up to 2 years from your job for childcare and be paid up to 85% of your salary. And you have this if you're employed, if you have a liberal activity, if you have an entrepreneurial activity, so all types of jobs practically. You have this strong social security of up to 2 years with generous benefits, and the father can use those as well if the mother wants to go earlier into the job market, so they can switch among the parents. It's a gender-neutral policy. In theory. In practice, we have 9 mothers to 1 father that use it, but in theory, it's designed as a gender-neutral policy. Another thing that we have successfully done, and this has been through the European funding, is to allocate financing dedicated to young people, I mean, Romanians from diaspora that want to invest and come back home as entrepreneurs. And we had dedicated funding for diaspora coming home. And this has been very interesting for the young people that were employed in those companies, because they had what they perceived as being a very modern working culture and a very international, but at home. And now what we try after COVID to endorse, but we don't have a full policy package on it, is to encourage more young people from Romania that have temporarily come home to stay in Romania, even if they work digitally for a company or an employer from another country. Because the cost of living is a bit lower, we have the infrastructure, and they would have, let's say, both worlds in a sense in parallel. And the last thing, and this has been targeted to government officials, but I think it can be expanded to other type of key roles through the green transition and very technical jobs, is that we, a couple of years ago, Romania created this package where you could choose any university in the world. If you were admitted into that university, the government would pay for your fees there and the cost of living. If you sign and you're committed to come back into the country for at least 5 years to play that key role within the public administration. But now I think that type of program can be done for high-skilled key roles that we're going to need in new types of construction, new types of energy, and so on. Because I don't think the university environment is going to develop that fast everywhere in the world. But this would be a solution where more countries would have access to key competencies that would help them develop those industries faster and not have such a big time lag between when some countries are able to do it and others not. So that would be, yeah.
Thank you, Honorable Anna. So about the question coming from our Honorable Member of Parliament of Senegal about the informal sector. So is there anything you want to say, Mr. Gill?
So I guess I don't know if you can hear me.
No, not.
No, you can't? Yes, there. So I actually was thinking about something else while you were asking that question, which is that why is that, you know, though we are going to see a large number of, though you still have the part of the world where we are still going to see a large population growth is sub-Saharan Africa, right? So then you say, okay, for sub-Saharan Africa to do well, what it must also do well is it must have economies that are growing too. So then I started to think about sub-Saharan Africa. Normally speaking, when a region does well, the large economies of that region, at least one large economy of that region does well. Because large economies then tend to attract foreign direct investment from other parts of the world. Large economies then try to sort of bring people together, etc. So you can think about East Asia, for example. You had China. If you think about South Asia, you have India. If you think about Latin America, it used to be Brazil and Mexico, and so on. When you look at sub-Saharan Africa, you find there are these 6 big economies that together form about 70% of the gross domestic product of that whole region. And those 6 economies, I can rattle them off as you think, okay? One, Nigeria, it's not doing well. South Africa, it's not doing well. Angola, it's not doing well. Sudan, it's not doing well. Ethiopia, it's not doing well. You have to get to number 6, which is Kenya, before you start to sort of see some hope there. Okay? So I think one of the things simply is that you have to have some economic vitality, you know? Now, the part about the informal sector, I think, you know, it's always a combination. I mean, if you look at poorer countries, they tend to have larger informal sectors. What is unhealthy is if a country becomes a middle-income country or a high-income country and so on, and still has an informal sector, right? So I don't think one should sort of prematurely start to worry too much about informal sectors and so on. What I think one should prematurely start to worry about, or one should think, is about education systems and education, you know? And that's where you find even countries that are fairly well off, right? Countries like South Africa and Angola. If you look at the education levels of these countries, they look much more like those of low-income countries, not middle-income countries, you know? And the same thing perhaps is true of Nigeria as well. So I don't fault Senegal and I don't fault Cote d'Ivoire, but I definitely fault these larger economies for not getting that.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Thank you to everyone. I think we will stop here taking questions because as being responsible of keeping the time, I will have to say to everyone that we have to move on to the closing of this global parliamentary forum. And as a conclusion of this session, I would like to say that, of course, we all want to have fair policies in terms of migration and not see a difference between an Ukrainian and a Syrian. Anyone is a citizen of the world, and we have to feel that we are open to being more human on those matters. And of course, this is very linked to economic development and to best practices, and this is why this forum is very important, and I am very glad to say, because I've been member of this forum since 2016, to see that the number of members of this parliamentary forum has doubled in less than 7 years. We were 1,000 in 2016, we're at 2,000 now. It's a free move to be member of this forum, and it proves that we are more and more people and members of parliament being attracted to this forum because we share best practices and we open very interesting debates. So now I will say thank you to everyone, to our speakers, and I will give the floor to Marlene Malahu-Forte. She will share with us the takeaways and conclude this forum. Thank you, everyone.
That's fine. You can stay. I should like to begin with a special thank yous. On behalf of our chair, the Right Honorable Liam Byrne, to the World Bank and the IMF for organizing this global parliamentary forum today, October 9, 2023, co-hosted by the House of Representatives and the House of Councillors of Morocco in the margins of the annual meetings here in Marrakesh, the first annual meetings in 50 years on the African continent. Of course, there are teams behind the team, and I want to say also a special thank you to Gorgana, Kofi, and Tila, and all the support staff for the work you have put in to make today a success. I believe it is true to say that parliamentarians have been engaged in a dialogue on development and key issues related to the global economy. We are confident that the exchanges between the representatives of the bank and the fund and parliamentarians, as well as the exchanges among colleague parliamentarians, will help to build the political will for development in Africa and beyond. We parliamentarians are clearer on our mandate to push for legislation to promote a more resilient future by improving, among other things, governance and accountability, policy framework to tackle climate change, gender equality, and migration. The forum has undoubtedly strengthened the parliamentary network's role as a knowledge-sharing platform for stronger parliamentary engagement in pursuit of better development outcomes. The network has been invited to think about a new vision to build a new international agenda. We are asked to preserve macro stability and to heal the economic scars. And I believe to do so will require a balancing act. Yes, there has to be discipline in the spend, but at the same time, there has to be understanding that in times of crises, government must deliver to the people and must respond and discharge their responsibility in a way that is felt at the points of need. And so I agree that while we must not entirely give way to popularism, and we must ensure that our decisions are based on quality data. We can never ignore the voices of the people. And that is the message I believe collectively we would have the bank and the fund continue to better understand. The global outlook sees rising debts, levels of debts, which will restrain decisions because of limited spending room. But the call to be heeded is for more debt swaps, in particular for climate financing. The call for a debt relief tool has been ongoing, and I hope it will not fall on deaf ears, having come to the continent for the first time in 50 years. The call is also for the fund to suspend its surcharge policies, which add costs atop interest rates, making financing more expensive, and for a common framework to be devised for lower income countries. We're told that there is a path to overcome the significant challenges. And as parliamentarians, we are in the business of inspiring hope in our people. That is why they vote us in. So may we acquire the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to make the right choices in taking the right path. Ladies and gentlemen, I declare the 2023 Global Parliamentary Forum here in Morocco a success and now officially closed. May you enjoy the rest of the proceedings. So you can kick your shoes off, take your coats off, and have fun.
He wants to take a picture, all of us. Just congratulations, really good.
The moderator earlier indicated that there were outdated bios that were obtained. On behalf of the network, may I extend an apology to those whose bio were not read in the updated form, and in particular to the Senior Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships at the bank, Axel van Krostenberg.